Thank you very much. Thanks for choosing to be here as opposed to touring around London. So that's appreciated. I know my competition is very tough. So hopefully this next hour will be worth it for you. Let me just get an understanding. How many of you are familiar with the area of egocentric vision? Okay, so not many. So for a few of you, this will be new. I look forward to hearing from you again if any of it is of interest to you. But this is a picture that was produced by an artist. He basically took a video of people going down the staircase and then collected all these images and put them into a single image. And as you can see, all of these are showcasing the current state of life, where we're all looking more at our phones than at each other or at the road or at the street. I always like when you watch people in concerts, they're never looking at the concert, they're looking at their phone, and their phone is capturing the context, and people are making fun of the progression of life. So if you agree that this is the current present, then many people think that the future is basically getting our hands free back, right? We want to be able to look at life and integrate with life and not be fully connected to our mobile phones, which are really making us struggle. Like we probably are working with one hand for most of our lives to stay connected. And if that future scares you, because that is sometimes scary to a few people, I'll tell you how I see it. We were discussing in the morning that I came from a background where my PhD was on analyzing footage coming from. And as you know, these are not owned by us. These are owned by others watching us. To me, egocentric or wearable cameras is this perspective. They call it source-valence. It's basically the alternative in Latin, which is the ability to monitor what people do to you, as opposed to the ability to be monitored. There is already some evidence that cyclists are using it to prove cases against drivers. People are using it to counterbalance the brutality of police. People are kind of capturing what's happening to them. It's a big shift from this idea that we are being captured. I understand that you might disagree with this perspective, but I'm telling you with the perspective I'm coming from. So I and probably some others believe that egocentric cameras are coming, and we've been raising the question, what can we do with such footage? Given you're not very much familiar with this footage, I'll show you some of the recordings that we've captured here in the UK as a part of a large-scale data collection called Ego4D. So this is what you could capture if you have a camera, and that camera is just capturing your daily life. Some of this is just boring stuff like cleaning a surface, and some can be more fun or a few hobbies. And even though this is capturing like short snippets of life, in fact, these are really long videos. So this is, again, from some of our recordings, and I'm just zipping through what this could be monitoring if you have a camera and that camera is just watching what you're doing. So this is the type of footage that we'll be talking about. And over the years, I've been involved with a number of data collection exercises. When we started this effort, the wearable cameras were not there. So we were giving people GoPros. These were the most reliable and stable devices we could hand out to people so they can easily wear them and record footage. We would have them head mounted so their hands are free. So we started with Epic Kitchens, where we collected basically 3 days of recording in people's kitchens. Later, we worked with Ego4D, which is a collaboration of 13 different universities. We collected data from 923 people in 74 different cities around the world. And these were some of the records I've shown you. So it's all aspects of daily activities. More recently, we've been working with another data collection exercise called Egocentric. This was released this CDPR, so a few weeks ago. And this was focusing on skilled activities. So we worked with highly skilled people. We're talking about chefs, actual players from national teams. So really people who are highly skilled in various things, including dancing, climbing, sports, cooking, etc. So this is another aspect of capturing really highly skilled participants, and we're recording more and more. These new data collections are using a wearable device. This is a wearable device called the ARIA glasses. It's available for researchers to use. But again, there are a number of devices that we have been now using following the influx of both commercial and research-oriented devices. So why am I starting to talk about data? Typically, people talk about trying to solve healthcare. I'm trying to solve. Here I'm telling you, I'm just collecting data. So why is this a good start? We are in the data-driven research era. That means the majority of what we do, regardless of the problem we're solving, is to have some sort of a data set. Then we have some sort of a model. And over time, we're hoping that we can progressively decrease the error on a test set that showcases that we've solved the problem. Right? This is the status of machine learning, computer vision, medical imaging. It's all about this data. So why did this become popular? Because of a number of data sets. One of them, popular one, is ImageNet. That means there are a set of researchers that sat around the room and said, we are interested in solving a problem, say object recognition. And they said, okay, we needed data for that. So they went and looked for WordNet, which is a set of words that represent concepts in life. Then they put these into some search engine. It was Flickr at time. And they searched for a few of these. They filtered them with various levels of filtering, and they created a data set. And things have followed, right? If you are in this era, then you know that we have been doing things like this. For example, if you're in video, you know, kinetics is a data set that was collected with the same objective in mind. They have a task, action recognition. They have a set of tasks they wanted to collect. They search for examples of videos, and they put them into the data set. However, there is an alternative trend to this direction that says, I don't know what the task is. I want to collect data first. Let me see what the data will be offering. And that is how us, amongst others, if you're familiar with autonomous driving, then you know, for example, the Kitty dataset was not collected to solve depth analysis. It was collected by putting sensors on cars and then collecting data. Similarly, Epic Kitchens was this idea of we're giving people cameras and we ask them to collect data. And this is what I call the chicken and egg problem. What comes first? Do the labels come first, or do the data come first? And this popular trend of from labels to data, this is typically what most of machine learning currently is aligned with. So if you talk ImageNet, you talk kinetics, something, all of these are data sets, and you can think of others in your particular field where you know what labels you want, and then you collect examples to correspond to those labels. There is this alternative trend, which is data first. And from data, you think, what labels have I already collected? And as I mentioned, Kitty as a driving data set, amongst others in Ego, they go with this trend. Why do people not like this trend? Many reasons, which is you don't know what you get until the data is collected. We really have no clue what types of labels you'll actually capture. You just give people devices, or you put devices on sensors, on cars, you can put devices on birds, but you don't really know what they will do. You can speculate, but you really don't know. In our case with Epic Kitchens, after we've collected data, we asked people to just look through the data and give us labels that explain what the data contains. Then we went and grouped these from what we call open vocabulary to closed vocabulary, creating really classes and examples. So they look like the same types of examples and other data sets that have labels, but they have been collected with data first. And over the years, we followed the same intuition. So we collect data first, and then we associate it with labels. In this case, with Ego4D, we call these narrations. So these are the sentences written at the top, which describe what has been captured with this data. We did not know in advance that there would be an example of someone fueling a bottle with oil. That is not a label we were aware that we will collect in advance. So basically, data first or labels first is very, very different. Importantly, if you collect data first, you get a naturally unbalanced data set. There are a lot more examples of certain classes than others, and these correspond to the occurrences of these examples in life. Versus when you go labels first, you get this unnatural assumption that you have equal numbers of examples of a certain class. You know, people attempt to do unnaturally balanced data set, and people prefer the right side because machine learners tell you, oh, if your data is unbalanced, don't talk to us. Well, they don't want to deal with life, basically, because life is highly, highly imbalanced. If you collect data first, it looks like it's hard to label, but the truth is it's basically exposing the ambiguity. Because you look at this and you say, how will I label this? I could label it like this. I could label it like that. And this ambiguity becomes evident when you try to label data that you've already collected. Versus when you start with labels first, it looks easy because you give me examples of gorillas. We'll give you 10 examples. We haven't asked the question of how would I label this image by default. So this ambiguity tends to be hidden. And many people are starting to discover these ambiguities in large data sets like ImageNet. Data first is a lot close to applications. This is the data you'll eventually get when you deploy any of your products in life. But at the same time, they have disadvantages because label first are very easy to expand. You can say, I want 10 more classes. But with data first, you can collect 1 year more of data and not get a single new label. And of course, what data first offers is a large number of research opportunities because you haven't yet labeled your task first. You didn't say, I want to do object recognition. You said, I wanted to collect data first, while this alternative is usually data suitable for a single task. So this approach that we've gone down with egocentric footage, data first, it allows you to bring a lot of possible many opportunities. And the remaining type of the talk, I will tell you about opportunities we found when we collected data first in egocentric videos. And these come in twofold. One, some of the standard tasks in video understanding proved to be significantly harder when we tested them on this data first approach. But also, some of the solutions that we've always hoped would work proved really that they finally worked when we tested them with this approach. So this is a mix of, some things proved to be much harder and some solutions that we've always hoped would basically transform the way we do computer vision started working accordingly. How are we doing? So now I'll take you through some of these examples of tasks and tell you what happened in egocentric vision and how did we achieve progress, basically. Action detection is a well-known task, which is take a video, tell me where in the video has something happened. And for years, action detection has been basically hasn't made any progress. The area was really stalling. And when we started applying some of these tasks on data like egocentric vision, what you see at the bottom is one video collected from egocentric footage in people's kitchens. The number of examples, like the scale, there is a tiny bit where you can see short parts of the video. These videos have no edits, have no cuts, they have no shots. And accordingly, attempting to do action recognition on this data is really significantly harder than prior work. And as a result, a new number of new approaches, Action Former is one of them, if you've heard it. This is not from our group, but this is people who've used egocentric data. They basically advanced action detection because they tried it on this very hard data, producing really a breakthrough in the field of action detection. Another popular topic is domain adaptation and domain generalization. It's a topic I really like, despite the fact that it's losing interest at the moment because people think foundational models will solve everything. But let's talk about the principle of generalization. So this is footage of someone performing a cutting action. And this is someone in a kitchen scenario, so a chef. And we can see that this person is certainly cutting a carrot with a knife. And we all agree that this is a standard action of cutting. This is a mechanic cutting, different setup, but also different tools. But we all fully agree that this is a cutting action because we're able to generalize what we're seeing into the principle of cutting, which is something is in whole, and after the action, it's in two or more parts. This is an example of someone building, and again, cutting using an angle grinder. And hopefully you agree that you're not going to use any of the other tools. Again, super dangerous if you attempt to. And also, you're not going to take the angle grinder to cut the carrots in the kitchen, because again, that sounds completely mad. And the more you look at scenarios, for example, cutting in arts and crafts with a scissor, cutting in gardening with a plier, you see that we're able to successfully generalize across very different scenarios. And this is one dimension that's super cool. But I told you we've been collecting data all around the world. And even within the same scenario, you see diversity across the world. So this is cutting somewhere in Europe. This is cutting in India, and I really like this footage. The more I see it, the more you think it's completely mad. They are moving the fruit towards the knife, not the knife towards the fruit. And they will convince you by lots of explanation that what we're doing in Europe is completely mad because we're using the knife, we're moving the knife. That's like so super dangerous. And they will tell you that it's a bad idea to use chopping boards. They're just so dirty, they will never use them. And so they train themselves to move stuff towards the knife rather than the other way around. And perfectly, we as humans, we understand the distinction, but we're not going to say this is not cutting. We will appreciate that this is a diverse way of doing stuff. And we've been collecting lots of ways of people cutting stuff around the world. And in this task, we wanted to create the first data set to try to achieve generalization over different scenarios and locations. That means we started with the Ego4D dataset, which is collected in 13 locations of people capturing in general understanding of 10 different scenarios. We labeled this data with action classes, so cut, open, close, move, put, etc. And so for each of the examples, you have a video, but you also have the scenario, the location around the world, and the action class. And this data set is 1.1 million samples, so good enough, because anything small, we know that we cannot really do much. But with the scale and with data first comes the long tail understanding of these data sets. So the y-axis here is log scaled, which will always be the case. There are a lot more examples of taking and putting stuff than unwrapping or drilling or painting. But each of the bars here, you can see on the right the various types of scenarios that we've captured performing exactly the same action. And then we want to do generalization. What's generalization? We take our whole data set. We take a combination of a scenario and a location, say cooking in Japan. We take the intersection between those as our test set. But we also remove all the examples of cooking and all the examples of Japan. So we don't want to be able to have seen any corresponding examples of cooking or Japan. So we want to generalize to a new location and a new scenario. And we've created 10 of these different test sets, depending on the size of the available examples in the data set. One of them is cooking in Japan. And we proposed one approach to handle generalization. In this case, we have the video, which comes from a specific scenario. This is someone cutting lemon, but in a gardening setup. What we do is we take lots of other examples in the training set. They come from different locations and different scenarios. We hide the video that corresponds to cutting in gardening. And we say, can you reconstruct in the feature space a representation of this video from those other videos, such as it becomes like you're cutting the lemon, right? So you can't see cutting the lemon in this setup. You have to collect some evidence from other types of cutting in other locations to be able to represent this example in an attempt that you learn to generalize. By doing so, you have to lift the example from its current visual representation and get some examples that are not dependent on the scenario or the location. More specifically, we basically have a two-stream approach. So you have videos and images. We have a frozen feature extractor, but we are learning these two projection layers, F and G. Eventually, we want to take a video and classify the action. That's eventually what we want to do during inference. But during training, we take other examples in the training set. We also project them into the same space. And we look at similarities between those examples. The diagonal is blocked. That means you can't reconstruct the video from itself. You have to reconstruct it from other examples. And then we create this plus V, which is a representation of this video from other videos in the batch, having not been accessed to the video itself. And that has to be close to the representation of the text action. We also have another reconstruction. That reconstruction has to be able to recognize the action itself. So basically, we share the classifier, and we learn this classifier that has to work from the reconstructed video from other videos in the batch. Once we train the data like this and we backpropagate through F, so F is the one we want to learn to become generalizable, we basically do nothing during inference. So during inference, we assume that we already have generalized. Okay, I'm going to skip this to show you some of the examples. So this is what you get. I told you we have 10 different sets. I show you 2 of them here, as well as the mean of the 10 different test sets. And then you have standard cross entropy if you don't train to generalize. We have a number of examples that are supposed to be good for domain generalization, but don't prove valuable in this case. And then we have our reconstruction approach, which clearly is beneficial for the best, the worst, as well as the average examples. If you're interested, data, method, and code, probably for everything I'm presenting today, is already released. Good. So I'll jump into another task. And my hope is by the end of the explanation, I would have shown you something that you're interested in. So I'm moving now to generative approaches, which are now very popular, presenting a work we presented the CVPR called Gen How To, learning to generate actions and state transformations from instructional videos. This work was led by Thomas, who spent the summer in Bristol. He's supervised by Joseph and Ivan, and he's from the University of Prague. Again, everything I'm going to tell you is about hands and objects. So this is an image of a hand with an avocado, and we would like to generate an example of this particular avocado in this particular setup after it was peeled, after it was put in a blender, and after it was turned to a smoothie. What's critical here, so the first example is a real image. The other 3 are generated images. You'll see very few attempts like this. Typically generated exists in another world, right? You just go from text to generated and you don't worry about real images. What we wanted here is to basically have a real setup saying, to show, say, a robot this and say, now do it like this. And so we needed to start from a real image. The current attempts to do generative, if you give a prompt and an input image, there are some approaches like instruct pix to pix or EFDDPM, and they really don't preserve the environment. They will produce something that matches the output, for example, the kneading of the dough, but they will have nothing to do with the original dough that you had in play. And what we wanted to do is to actually be able to transform the object you have in the environment you have with the right prompt. And in this paper, probably like most other papers, we have 2 contributions. We have a data set that allows you to do that, and the method. And the data set is particularly key. What we wanted is pairs of images, where the first image is an action before it was happening, and the latter is the action after it was happening in the same environment. And those pairs don't exist, you would think, unless you look at videos. So instructional how-to videos available online offer these continuous recordings in the same environment as people carry out actions. So we were able to take a self-supervised approach that takes an instructional video, and around every description, it will basically select 3 images, an initial state, and an action state, and a final state. We then take these action and final images, we put them into a captioning model, and we produce a description of exactly what this action entails. That gives us this data set of 5 different things, 3 images and 2 sentences. We then train practically a control net, so a stable diffusion along with a control net. Our conditioning here is a real image. So we have a variational autoencoder, which matches the decoder, and we train this to produce either the action image or the output image. Being diffusion based, we can play with the noise, and the noise shows us how this is working. Basically, as we iterate through the stable diffusion, we're moving from the input image to the final image. Again, the first one is real. All the other ones are generated with different levels of noise. And you can see that the method is capable of actually making progress through the video, through the action, having only seen the 2 examples. But of course, it's trained on diffusion that's just seen millions. But in this case, it's only seen a small number of paired examples. If you're interested, look at the paper, because we also have a quantitative analysis, which looks at the difference between having real images and generated images for both seen and unseen examples. But I'll end with showing you some of the visualizations that Thomas had created. So this is just an interpolation between 2 images. One of them is real, the other one is generated, and you can see the prompt in every case. This is working on a limited number of examples. We're not claiming it's a solved problem, but it's one of the first attempts to take a real image and to produce a generated image in context. I'm going to move from images and videos into audio-visual, and tell you that one of the problems in video understanding in general is for years and years we've been working in the silent movie era. We have been considering videos regardless of the original corresponding audio that comes with them. Videos are highly multimodal, and very quickly we are realizing that the audio that comes with video is very significant to decide actions, particularly significant when it comes to egocentric footage. That's because the camera with the microphone is moving with you towards the action, and so it's giving you a very nice and clear audio of the ongoing action. Hopefully this will work, and you'll hear some of the object interactions that we capture using egocentric footage. Nope, that did not work out. Let's give it another shot. I thought that was the right one when we tested, but that did not work out. Okay, so probably I will just, am I still sharing on Teams? Maybe not. Oh, okay. Fine, believe me for now, but please look at some of the examples to see that you can hear the sound of the object-object interactions. So this is the sound of the knife hitting the plate, and it's very, very clear. We have sounds of material, so you can imagine the material sound of when you're crumbling something that is plastic, or some sound emitting objects. So this is the sound of the, yeah, fine. That wasn't supposed to be that what you should hear. But if you're really interested, I suggest that you look at some of the videos available online for Epic Kitchens to really hear how clear the sound is. And after we collected Epic Kitchens by a good number of years, we started looking at this assumption that you take a video and an audio, and you take a set of labels, and then you train multimodality with the objective that you can learn those labels from this audio. And this is a good follow-up to the keynote in the morning on multimodality, because really at times it's an incorrect assumption to believe that the modalities represent the same set of labels. We've always doubted, what the problems are, because, for example, we're giving labels like wash carrot versus wash tomato, and we're expecting audio to distinguish one from the other. Clearly, audio can't. We'll know you're washing something, but it can't really distinguish these two different actions. Also, there are lots of actions that are silent by default. So Jacob and Jason, who led this work from Bristol and Oxford, spent a year and something with a good number of annotators annotating only the audio stream of this dataset. That means the people were not given the video. They were only allowed to hear the audio and produce their understanding of what is happening and when is it happening. Producing for the same time, for the first time, a dataset that's labeled with visual labels and audio labels. And the analysis is really interesting. So basically we have the same set of videos, but two distinct set of annotations, visual and auditory. I think this is not going to work either, despite our attempts to test it earlier. But again, please look at the examples. Again, everything I will present to you is hugely long-tailed, because that is data-first approach. But we really worked with annotators that would look through the video, and they would basically say, from here to here, I hear an action by audio only, and I think it represents this particular representation. We took these free-form description and grouped them into classes. We also annotated the sounds of materials, so we know which two materials, because sometimes you know that something plastic is hitting something ceramic, but you don't know what that is. So we really labeled the materials, and after labeling the audio only, we verified using visual whether that's a correct audio label or that's a folly. So you think you hear something, but actually is incorrect. And we've released both the correctly categorized and the uncategorized events. So having presented the data, I will tell you about the first approach to integrate these two sets of labels into an approach that understands multimodality in audio and video. I'll present this work, then I'll pause for questions, so you remember what you had before we finish. So Tim which we call a time interval audiovisual machine, is a transformer. That means it takes examples from videos, example from audio. But critically, we call it a time interval machine because it takes as a query a time interval. That means you say between this time and this time, what do you think has happened in the visual modality? You put this as a query, and the output has to be, I think there is this visual action ongoing. You take exactly the same machine, and you want to ask about a different point in time and a different modality. You basically switch your start and end time, you switch your modality, and then you ask about this particular interval. What's the difference between this and previous approaches? Positional encoding to date has been one moment in time. So you have your positional encoding, and that increases over time. Here, our positional embedding is an interval. So it has a complete distinction between two things that might be overlapping, but of different durations. So accordingly, we can ask the same transformer questions like, what happens in the visual modality between 3 and 5 seconds? What happened in the audio modality between 1 and 5? And the first would say you're rinsing a sponge, and the second you say, I'm hearing the sound of water. And these labels come during training from the combination of the visual and the auditory labels I presented earlier. In more details, again, we have visual and auditory encoders. We feed these through a projection layer. We have these features. We also have the intervals and this time interval machine that encodes an MLP that encodes both the start and the end time, but also encodes the start and end times of all features. So all the features have intervals. Your query have an interval. Everything is associated with the modality embedding, and then it's purely a vanilla transformer that's capable of predicting both visual and auditory signals. The input is an untrimmed video. The output is both suitable for recognition and detection. I'm not talking about the detection here, but always we're so happy when we produce results that outperform methods that are trained with language without using language, which is currently these days a plus. Okay, before telling you more, I'll pause maybe 5 minutes for questions before you are completely overwhelmed. And then I can tell you more about video like object segmentations and 3D, which I hope is of interest to some of you. Any questions before you forget? Yes.
Have you ever found a video where you labeled it something 3 years ago and now it means something else?
Not really, because these are, well, no, we might have labeled it something, but we knew then this was an ambiguous label.
So
there are no surprises after time, because the people labeling are humans who see in kitchen environments, right? So there are no big surprises to humans labeling.
I mean this. So imagine somebody sitting on a desk at home, the TV
Yes.
in a living room. 3 years ago, maybe you would have labeled it as chilling out on the sofa. But now it means working from home.
Oh, I see.
So the concept.
We're not labeling on this level. We're labeling on the fine grain level of opening a fridge, cutting a tomato. So it's very fine grain. So I speculate it's very unlikely these fine grain stuff have changed context, but I'm not aware of an example like this. Any other questions? Yes, at the top. Yeah, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My question is a little bit more generic. It has to do with the computer vision in general. So now most of the researchers think that, okay, for difficult problems like action recognition, we just need to get more data to create more sophisticated networks, a million layers, a trillion weights, stuff like that, train it, and then essentially will solve the problem. So do you think that this is only the case? Don't we need something else apart from this purely data-driven approach?
So even though I do believe the data-driven approach is key, because if you don't see the example, how will you know it, right? However, most of what I presented isn't really just chuck the data into a machine, right? So there is a lot of really thinking how to use the data best and how to avoid noise, errors, or assumptions. For example, you recognize stuff purely from audio. So there are still things to do in terms of understanding your data. I think the problem is not really whether we are using the data or not. The problem is, do we understand the data when we use it, or is it blind? My problem isn't really people using data, but people downloading data set, getting a number out, and never ever looking at a single image from this data set. And they just download the next data set because they need 5 of them in their paper. They don't know what the data contains. That is the problem. So it's not really doing the data, it's really knowing what your data is. Every data set collected has its assumptions. So what I presented to you, which is labels first, data first. If people don't know what is the type of data collection that their data sets have been built on, what's the assumptions behind it, they will create something that is as dumb as data in, data out, right? So data is critical, absolutely. And currently, without the data, we are unable to do machine learning. That's the current era. We will get to a point where we have maximized the usage of the data and want to do more. But the assumption that you can do machine learning having never seen the data, I think that assumption is gone. So I apologize for anyone who believes in knowledge first. What I think knowledge first is, humans don't have knowledge first. You're not born, but you first see the data, and then you're being given the label. So, your mom would tell you this is this, but that doesn't mean you had to have the label to understand it's an object. Language is ambiguous, has lots of shortcomings, has its own benefits, but is not necessary for kids to basically manipulate objects. We know that, right? But if you say, I would like to generalize to data I have never seen, I would like to go to Mars and be able to generalize, and I will never have seen Mars. To me, that's a bit of science fiction. There's a bit of support, I hope. Okay, so yes.
Sorry, I have one final question. When you are having the video encoder,
Yes.
and the audio encoder,
Yes.
okay. So, and of course you have people, I mean, trying to label it properly based on the action server. So, especially in the kitchen situation and the videos, you have a lot of people, for example, first talking about the action without being an action, let's say chat sense, where they present whatever is the product that they're trying to cook. And there is a lot of audio with minimal action.
Yeah.
So
We don't have this type of footage, right? So the footage we have is we ask people just record their life. Okay, there is no talking over. So these are not how to. I've shown some examples of using how to where we're not using the audio. But indeed, if you take the data of YouTube, you have mostly talking heads, and there's evidence that at least within the of Kang and at Oxford that says 50% of what people say in YouTube videos isn't visually in the YouTube video. But people just explain stuff, right? Here we have down the route of when I say people label the videos, this is after they finish. But this is people, we tell them, start your recording before you walk into the kitchen. Only stop as you walk out. And that's it. There is nothing else. Okay, thank you. Okay, let me tell you more, hopefully, that will give you more ideas about opportunities in Egocentric. But this is the most difficult set of labels I have worked on, which are pixel level annotations from data that's collected completely in people's homes without any instructions. So this is a huge effort between Bristol, Toronto, and Michigan. Well, David is now in New York City, but he was in Michigan then. And we've labeled these pixels with actions, interactions, but they're also long-tailed. And critically, they also have these hand-object contact information. I remember we spent a good while just annotating hand-glove object. It was like a month of additional stuff when we realized that's another interesting thing between hands and objects. But really, the interplay between hands and objects when captured in Egocentric is very, very interesting. For example, in this setup, we all know that the person is carrying the bag on the right. This is a bag. I hope the colors are not, tricking you. And inside the bag, there is this cucumber in this example. We also know here what the person is doing. So one hand is holding the vegetable, the other is holding the knife. And as I told you, there are these hand object interactions. But really, when we analyze the footage, there were very interesting aspects of what people do in daily life. So this is after annotation. And again, the data was not collected for a set of labels. 40% of the time, people in kitchens, the two hands are holding two different objects to carry out the action. So you have hand object, and it's the interplay between these two objects that forms the action. Then there is another 20% where the two hands are holding the same object. That means 60% of daily life requires the interplay of two hands. Now, whenever I present these to people, particularly doing robotics, I say the more robotics is a one-handed task, the more you're missing 60% of life. You see all these robotic videos. What are they doing? Opening drawers and closing drawers. Opening drawers, picking an object, putting it down, closing drawers. That's not really what people do in life. And that's why the gap between imitation learning and reality is very much hindered by the one-hand problem in robotics. And having spoken to a few people who work in that, it's basically a security problem for them. They can't put two robots close to one another at the moment. And the robots are not by design two-handed. There are now some interesting attempts like Aloha, etc., that have two hands, but this is still very, very early stages. There is 27% where it's a one-hand interaction and a combination of stuff where the two hands are visible or invisible. But the outcome of what we had is on top of Epic Kitchens, having these dense labels. We call them BISER, which is video instance segmentations and object relations. And really, this is triggering a lot of interesting discussions, particularly for hand objects. So that means we take an image or a video from egocentric setup, and we wish to know, given, in this case, given the hand type and the object, we wish to reconstruct the hand grasp. And this is a known problem, and people have been solving it. However, they have been solving it using the images on the left. These are non-egocentric views. And on the right, you see the egocentric views. And the gap between the two is very much related to how much you see of people's fingers. So things work on the left, because guessing the pose is probably easy. They don't work on the right, because you really don't see most of the fingers. People are using their touch to understand. So in this work, we've been really looking at contact points. So before the contact point, the hand is free and the object is standing. Then there is a short moment in time where the hand is grasping. Then there is a long duration at which people are interacting with the object, and we call this a stable grasp. The advantage of that is that people are holding the object but moving it around. So hopefully we will be able to see a number of possible videos. So like this, right? So even though in one image we don't see the fingers, hopefully by combining all those images around which the hand is still grasping the object, you can see the fingers. Interestingly, if you stabilize the wrist, you can see on the right that even though the hand is fully grasping the object, there is still motion. So the object is still in motion relative to the wrist. If you're interested, we labeled a number of left hand and right hand interactions. And in this case, there is more left hand than right hand, which might seem unintuitive, but that's of course, because the left hand is grasping the object and the right hand is typically manipulating it. So you have a lot more hand grasps in your non-dominant hands. And then we have these sequences of objects from egocentric footage. We use Hammer, which is one of the latest hand pose estimators. It does really well. And then we estimate the pose accordingly, having assumed the pose relative to the hand is within certain constraints. The output of this exercise is data that looks like this. And so for the first time, we're able to start estimating hand-object interactions for now within these stable grasps, but of objects in daily life. So this is not data captured in the lab. And again, this is not data captured for hand-object interactions. This is the same data you've seen before. We give people cameras, but we're looking here at the subset of hand-object interactions for a known set of objects. We would not be able to see some of these interesting examples if we had collected only data of people moving mugs around. And again, interestingly, most of these mugs are filled. Most of these bowls are like, they have things inside them, which is completely different to the types of videos you would see currently available in hand object reconstruction and robotics. I will end, do I have 5 more minutes? I will end with a bit on 3D mapping. Again, when we collected the data from EPIC, it was very much beta like this. Recently, with lots of help of intelligent people, we were able to transform this data to 3D. Again, the data was not collected with 3D in mind. There is no scan of the environment. There is no depth sensor and no special sensors. So we're able to reconstruct the 3D from dynamic environments. If you see any of the 3D reconstruction works, they are static environments with a camera moving around. These are people going around and doing things. So a good number of what they're seeing is things being opened, things are being closed. So we have lots of dynamic stuff. We released the camera pose estimations for a large number of environments. And part of the trick here is to figure out how to sample while head is moving really fast. And we started putting stuff in 3D. That means we're going from the video you see on the top left, putting the objects in 3D and moving them in 3D. The examples you see here are objects that people are moving, and you see an example of an object. Currently, it's a dot because we still can't model these objects very successfully. But we see these dots moving in space and being put in a specific location. And we call this work out of sight, not out of mind, because for the first time, as people put objects around environments, we're moving beyond the video. So as you move around, we still know where you've put your object. That object hasn't really disappeared from people's understanding because the camera moved around. And I'm particularly interested in this because an egocentric video is a partial representation of the world, and we all have a good map of the environment as we move around. With the success of 3D understanding, we're now able to go beyond that. We do that by using the information in depth estimation. So we have automatic depth estimation. That doesn't give you metric space, but we scale that using the 3D environments we've built from just 0 to 1 to some metric space, allowing us to lift objects to 3D. While we don't have ground truth, we've tested how successful this is by labeling some of the static objects around the environment, showcasing that roughly we're 2-3 centimeters wrong, and that is without any additional information. But this allows us now to understand what's in view, what's out of view, what's in view but occluded, versus what is reachable, what is not reachable. And again, I haven't mentioned, I'm going to skip Ego4D a little bit and finish with, if this of any interest to you, I encourage you to read this survey we put out called An Outlook into the Future of Egocentric Vision. It was a great exercise in a collaboration between Torino, Catania, and Bristol, where we basically tried to envisage what the future looks like. We wrote stories about this device called Ego AI. That is, different people around the world will be wearing these devices, and we drew what these look like. So this is Ego Home, which is this guy wearing a camera, going around, they come home, the device is suggesting what they should eat based on what they've eaten to date. It's guiding them through the process with some 3D and audio projections. It's basically reminding them about things, suggesting how they could improve their recipe, then transforming them into another point in life, maybe reminding them about a holiday they've had while they're having their soup. They can enjoy a card game with others. This is the future as we envisage it. You might agree or disagree, but this is a version of the future from people who are working in this area. Sorry. Then for each of these stories, we've mapped these to standard tasks like localization, decision-making, 3D understanding, and we showcase the gap between each of the current state of the art and the envisaged future. The survey is 46 pages, excluding references, more than 400 references, but hopefully it's readable because it's centered around these stories. In this talk, I told you about the chicken-egg problem of labels and data. We went through a number of tasks that became harder and solutions which became more rewarding, having done data first. I didn't mention EgoXO4D, which is the data we collected with experts. It's just been released. So if you're interested, have a look. And I ended by telling you about the envisaged future. I get so many invites to come and talk about this exciting topic, but this is the work of a great team. And I'm immensely grateful that they have been with me on the journey for a while. If you have any questions, I'm happy.